Thank you for joining us with Coffee with the Candidates. I have Laura Kotalik with me here today, who is running for Yankton County Auditor. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. This is a really great opportunity.
Well, why don't we start by having you tell the viewers a little bit about yourself.
All right. Well, I grew up in Yankton and, went to Yankton schools. I was active in band and track and flags and, just a variety of things, 4-H. And then later I served as a 4-H leader. And so I was actually served as the treasurer for the Leaders Association for a time. I'm married to Tim, my husband, and we have 3 kids who are all college graduates and off doing their thing. So I'm super proud of them. So that's a good thing. I went to college at SDSU for 3 years. Then I transferred to USD, so I can play both sides of that. And I have a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Arts from USD. And then I taught at Yankton Middle School for a time. Then I stayed home with my kids for a time, went back to teaching, and then I was working at Calvary. And so as part of my work at Calvary, we started a preschool, we started a daycare, and so just as part of my job there, I oversaw staff and volunteers. There were about 400 volunteer staff positions that we figured out throughout the year, and about 35 to 40 staff that were paid. So, I have some experience with that, so that's part of my background. And then I kind of thought maybe I'd retire, and then the auditor position sort of presented itself, and so I looked into that and thought that might be something I would be interested in, and the more I looked into it, then I decided I would run, so here we are.
So I'm guessing a lot of the viewers really don't know what the auditor does. Can you shed some light on that for us?
That is a really good question. And that is probably the biggest question that people ask me when I tell them that I'm running for auditor. So when I first took out my petition and I asked at the office for a job description, and they really didn't have one, and they referred me to the codified law. And so I looked at that. I looked at there's an auditor handbook, so I looked at that and just tried to find out as much as I could information-wise. Turned in my petition, and but some of the things that the auditor does, to me it's sort of like 2 main areas, and one would be the financial part of it, where they keep track of the county's budgeting, accounts receivable, accounts payable, payroll. They do some HR things with keeping track of vacation time, things like that for the county employees. And then there's the election part, which is a huge part in helping to oversee the elections for the county. And then there's other like littler things that they do, with, keeping track of some of the ordinances and the documents that they need to keep on file, keeping track of the liens against, different things, that if someone has a bill with an ambulance or, things like that they just have to keep track of those things. And so that would all be, through the auditor's office. Yeah,
that's a lot.
That is a lot.
Yeah, they also spend, I know, a significant amount of time working with the county commissioners, attending the county commission meetings, and kind of help keeping that organized as well. So are there any certifications that are necessary to be an auditor?
No. And that was one of the things that I was a little bit surprised at, that for all of the responsibilities that are required for the position, there are no requirements to run for auditor. And so, but there are some classes. So when someone becomes an auditor, then, and it's actually the South Dakota Association of County Officials, they have classes, continuing ed classes that you can take that would help you to, kind of be trained and learn more. There's 14 credits of classes each year. You can go to a conference, you can go to the spring workshop, And then they have district meetings. So, there's opportunities for education there too, which is really helpful. And then as the auditor, you're in more of a supervisory position as well. And so then there is a supervisor certification that you could get as well, which is just another separate set of classes is what it looks like.
Well, it's nice that there's opportunities to receive that continuing education and participate in that as needed.
Yep, definitely.
So what are important skills that you think an auditor should possess?
Probably the most important would be honesty and integrity, and just making sure that people feel confident in the person who's in the position, because if you can't trust them, then I mean they just oversee so many things that are so important, and so that would probably be the main thing. Also being good with numbers and having sort of a background with finances, things like that is of course helpful. And then communication skills are huge, and being able to communicate well with the people that you're supervising within the office, as well as people who are in the other offices in the building, with the public that comes in, when they have questions, things like that. So those are all things that would be really important.
Well, that's a great segue into the next question about, how do you intend to manage communications with those various groups? Because how you communicate to the public may or may not be the same as you talk to the county commissioners or staff.
Right. So I guess, being a new person coming in, the first thing to do would just to be get to know them and get to know what they do, and make sure that people in different offices are aware of what each of the other offices do. Sometimes, when I know that there's a lot of people in the public who don't know what the auditor does, maybe some of the people who actually work in some of the other offices within the county building may not know all of the things that would be covered in that office. So I guess just meeting them, building a relationship with them, and then and being honest, so when people do come in and if they have questions about something, if I know, I'll tell you, and if I don't, I will tell you, but then I'll want to go find the answer and get back to you. I always like to communicate in person the best. That's kind of my favorite way to talk to people. But of course you can always text or call or send an email, or so there's lots of ways to communicate, but I still think the best is face to face.
So as you're working with those other offices within the building, can you tell us how those relationships kind of intertwine, if you're maybe aware of that?
Well, the Department of Equalization is maybe the starting point with some of the financial part of it, because their job would be to, assess your property. So if you own property, they will come, put a value on it, and then they would send that value to the auditor's office. And the auditor's office would be in charge of assigning the levies, because they have to make sure that the budget for the county is being met with the revenue that would be from property taxes. And so then once they've sort of done those calculations, then they would send that information to the treasurer's office, and then they would, send you your bill. Yeah, and then you get to pay it. That's always nice. As far as with the Register of Deeds, there would be some filing of documents with the liens and things like that. So I know that would be a part of that. The state's attorney's office, you would need to go to them for any legal advice or questions that you would have with them. I know that probably all of the different offices in the building would, be submitting their receipts and expenditures and things like that they would need for the bookkeeping end of it. So you kind of would have to work with all of them.
So are you familiar, or would you have any experience to know of how maybe those offices could work better together?
Going in as a new person, the first thing I would want to do is just communicate with them and find out from them, what do you see as something that could be done better, because they would know right off the top of, right off the bat. And then of course that would be something you would want to have as a continual conversation, as far as following up or checking back. And I know they have department head meetings, so that would be another avenue to just have some discussion and talk to them about, any concerns or ways that we can work together better, things like that.
So do you know if our auditor's office works with other county auditor offices?
Well, what I know is that, I would hope so. And I know that the other county offices, like they have the district meeting, so that would be a time when they could communicate and find out what's going on or what's going on around the state or things like that. But as far as like the school districts, they would be, you have lots of school districts that are not all in Yankton County. So that would be somewhere where you would need to communicate with other counties because you share a school district. There's also a road between, I know there's a county line road, and so I would imagine there's some communication with maintaining the road and things like that when it's on the county line. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think with the auditor's office and how complex the job is, learning from other experienced auditors would be important, and having those tools or those mechanisms to get together and learn more from each other seems like that would be a helpful tool.
Yep. And they probably have had something happen that, they could give you advice.
Right,
so that's always good.
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of those random experiences happen in different places around the state, and it's nice to share that so you can find a solution much quicker. So transparency in elections has been a hot topic at the national level. Tell us about the process that they use in Yankton for elections, and if you know of any ways that we might be able to improve that process.
Well, I think that you're right. It is definitely a hot topic. I think that, like with the national election in 2020, you hear a lot of people who sort of were speaking out about things that they saw or heard or witnessed, and a lot of them don't have anything to gain by doing that. And so then that would just give me reason to really listen and research into what they're saying, because you want, our voting is so important, and it's really something that as citizens we want to protect and treasure it and make sure that we have an integrity. And so when I was starting out looking into the auditing position, there's a group in Sioux Falls that's called the South Dakota Canvassing, and they were looking into some election integrity issues. And so I actually went up there one day and to learn, because that's important, and to kind of see what you're getting into. And so I went up there, and what they were doing is looking at the voter rolls and who is registered to vote at different locations. And so we took the voter registrations from certain addresses that would look a little suspicious, like if you had 5 people registered to vote at your house and they had different last names. And then we actually canvassed, and we went out into the communities and knocked on doors and just asked, told them what we were doing, of course, and then just let them know, we see that you have these certain people who are registered to vote at your address. Would that be correct? And most of the time it was a case of, well, no, actually it's just me and my wife, or my husband and I that live here, and those were the people we bought the house from. Or we did have one case where the lady said, yeah, I know who that is, and they've never lived here, but they were registered to vote there. So that opened my eyes up, because there are issues, and you like to think that there aren't any. And so that was a really great experience for me. And then I also went up to Dr. Douglas Frank. I don't know if you've, that he would be someone that you might want to look up and kind of listen to, but he has looked into a lot of the and especially with the 2020 election, just what happened, and looking at some of the numbers and the data. So that, and I'm a math person, you know, so I was really intrigued by that because it made a lot of sense to me, just the statistics of it, and with the algorithms and all of that part of it too, that that was really interesting. I was thankful to be able to learn that. But as far as the process in Yankton goes, you know, you have your voter registration. So if you're not registered to vote, you should do that. And then once you're registered to vote, then that creates a voter roll, or a list of who's registered, and that's kept. And then of course, when it's time to vote, you know, then the auditor will be in charge of getting, you know, everything ready. The ballots have to be prepared. You need to have workers lined up. And so typically the Republican and the Democratic committee can submit names, and then you know, they can kind of generate a list of workers and get those lined up. And then on the day of the election, of course, then you have to make sure that your voting centers are prepared and ready and have all the supplies that they need. And then once you are ready to go for the day, you know, everybody comes in and votes. And so you always want to make sure to maintain just the you always want to project, we're doing everything we can to make sure that this is safe and secure, and so that people have confidence in that their vote does matter. So that's really important. And then at the end of the voting time, then the ballots would be collected, and then they would be taken back to the auditor's office and counted. And so you want to make sure that you're in view of, you know, the public. They can see, we see the votes coming in, we see them being counted, you know, there's no funny business, we know this is a good thing. And then they would of course publish the results. So that's kind of the process. And then I guess the last part of that question then is how could you improve that? And I think that during the 2020 election, there were some things that happened because of COVID, which a lot of things changed with COVID. And so one of the sort of you know, so some of the counties use drop boxes, and I know Yankton has a drop box. And if you read the codified laws, which I've spent more time in codified laws than I thought I would, but you know, there are certain ways to return, say, an absentee ballot. And in the codified laws, the ways that you can return them would be you mail them in, or you can return them in person, or you can send them with your husband or, you know, another person to deliver them to the auditor's office. And so really the drop box isn't an option. And so that's one of the things that, you know, could be improved on, because that just, it's sort of, and I don't think, like, I personally don't feel like any person that has worked at our elections has done anything wrong or anything like that. But just some of those things that we could improve on and make sure, you know, some of those, like the Dropbox sort of opens the door for potential. And so if you can keep that off of the table, it's probably a good thing. I think just my experience with South Dakota canvassing and looking at the voter rolls, and so making sure that we can get the voter rolls as accurate and up to date as we can. I know sometimes it's hard to do that just with the rules, so then it's you have to look at what does the codified law say, how can you go about doing that, and maybe then there's things that we need to change in the law, you know, as far as gaining information. So that would be something to look at, definitely. I would like to see more transparency in our ability to view the ballot counting process. I went, you know, if you had been at the city school election to view it, it was very difficult to see the entire process. And so I just think that would be something that could be improved easily. There's another site that I've had a little experience with now, is the Secretary of State website, and there's a lot of information on that too. So if anyone did have questions, that would be a place to go. They have really great resources on there. But on that site, it lists the certified equipment. And so we want to make sure that we're using equipment that's certified. And right now we have poll books that are not certified. So that's a question I have, should we not use them, or why are they not certified? And so I'm trying to find some answers to that right now as far as the poll books go, but that is another question. I guess like I said before, I just want people to have confidence and feel like things are transparent and upfront, and that they just can trust in the whole process. So integrity and honesty are super important.
So I just have a follow-up question, because I don't know the process, but when you talk about the voter rolls kind of needing to be cleaned up, I've looked at our voter rolls here in Yankton, and I'll see, oh, so-and-so moved that I know,
right.
or so-and-so died.
Right.
What is the process, if you know, and if you don't, I totally understand, but of how you take someone then off of that list?
And that's a challenge, that really is. Right now, if someone is inactive, which would mean they haven't voted or done anything for 4 years, then they can be listed as inactive. And then the office would send out a postcard and try to touch base, basically, to see, and if the postcard gets returned, then I think they can take them off, because there was nobody at that address. If they, and once they're inactive, then I think they have to be actually 8 years before they can completely remove them. So it is a process. And I know that they are supposed to get a list from the clerk of court. So if anyone has been declared like mentally incompetent, then they would be taken off. If someone is incarcerated, with a crime that's of the level, then they would also be taken off. And then of course, if someone dies, then they would be taken off too. And my understanding right now is that they can look at the obituaries, and so just a question I have is, we have death certificates, right, in our Register of Deeds office? So I'm not sure, if that could be better utilized to help with that, or what. So that's a question I have that is kind of next on my list to sort of look into. But
yeah, because I could sometimes feel like unclaimed
right.
dollars at the state treasury.
Right.
They have plenty of dollars they want to give out, and you look at that list like, oh my gosh, I know 5 of those people who live in Yankton. That's kind of the same thing when you look at the voter rolls, seeing who's maybe moved to another district. And do you know if someone registers in another district, if they automatically get removed from our list, or what happens behind the scenes on that? So
that is something that I'm not really sure. And so again, I don't want to say I know, because I'm not positive, but I have thought about that. So if someone goes to vote somewhere else, then to me it would make sense for that county to just send a postcard to Yankton and say, hey, just want to let you know, so and so registered to vote here. Because if you had a question right on there that said, are you currently registered to vote somewhere else, then they could notify Yankton and say, okay, take them off, because now they are registered somewhere else. So
yeah, and I know with Department of Motor Vehicles, when you get your driver's license, you can also check a box to have your information updated as well. So
right, and that's one thing I kind of wondered about with being able to register to vote in lots of different places, is if you aren't really interested in voting, but you go to get your driver's license and then you check the box that says register me to vote, so you get registered, but then you never vote, and then after 4 years you'd get put on inactive, but then you go to fill out something somewhere else and it's on that form and you check it again. So that could be a way where you have somebody who is on the voter roll who hasn't voted for 12 years, but if they sort of get reactivated because of something like that, then it makes me kind of wonder, is that really a good way to do it? But
yeah, I mean, it's one of those that it's a much deeper process to dig into and find those solutions.
Right.
But I do agree with you that, transparency is important. I have seen the voting down at the county building, and I felt the process was very thorough and very good, and
Right.
I personally didn't see any flaws in that, and I really appreciate the investment that's been made in the new voting equipment that they have down there, because I remember years ago when the ballot machine would jam up and it would take hours and hours to be able to count the rest of those ballots because it just didn't work right. So and I know it's an expensive endeavor to invest in that type of equipment, so I'm glad that the county has been able to do that. So in closing, is there anything that you wanted to share with the viewers today that maybe wasn't a part of one of the previously asked questions?
I would say just, treasure your right to vote, and if you're not registered, register. And the election, the next one coming up, is on June 7th, so come out and vote and be a part of it. And it's one of the things where start local, if people want to see our crazy world out there and think, oh my goodness, but everything really starts with us as individuals and what we can do in our own world. So when it came to be, should I run for auditor or not, and it's like, well, what can I do? So here I am.
Well, thank you for putting your name in the hat. It's always good to have elections, and then that's why we do these Coffee with the Candidate interviews, to give people an opportunity to share a little bit about themselves. And for those listening, the absentee voting is open right now, so you can go down to the county building in the commission chambers is where they're hosting that. And if you choose to vote in person on June 7th, your locations are Yankton City Hall, Yankton Fire Station number 2, Gayville Community Center, Mayfield Store, Lesterville Fire Hall, and Lewis and Clark Recreation Area. So Laura, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having this. That was very nice.